The sun blazed down on the desert, casting an oppressive heat over the barren landscape. Darren wiped sweat from his brow, his shirt sticking to his back. His feet were sore, his body exhausted from the day's work. But there was no time for rest. The storm was coming, the sandstorm. The winds howled in the distance, carrying with them the promise of destruction. He had to finish reinforcing his shelter before it hit. He had been stranded here for days after the crash. The ship, his only way off this desolate planet, was nothing but a twisted wreckage, scattered over the sand like a broken toy, alone. With no hope of rescue, Darren had only one goal now: survival. His hands gripped the shovel, the blade digging deep into the hot sand. It felt like an eternity since he had first begun digging, trying to carve out a space that might protect him from the storm. The sand was unforgiving, always slipping back in as quickly as he could move it. But he had to keep going. He couldn't give up now. With every strike, he thought about what had brought him here. The crash, the explosion, the dead crew members, the loneliness, the endless, empty sky above him. But thinking about it didn't change anything. It wouldn't help him survive. So, he kept digging, his mind wandering as his body moved on autopilot. Then, something strange happened. The shovel hit something solid, something that didn't feel like the normal compacted sand he'd been digging through. Darren paused, heart racing. He leaned over, wiping his brow, and looked at the spot where his shovel had struck. His instincts told him to stop, to leave it alone. But his curiosity pushed him forward. With trembling hands, he began scraping away the sand. He cleared away a layer, then another. And there it was, something unmistakable. The curve of a form. It was hard to see at first, the shape barely visible beneath the layers of sand, but it was definitely there. His breath caught in his throat. He dug faster now, the adrenaline kicking in. The storm was coming, but this was a discovery. Something more important than the storm. The storm could wait. Whatever was buried beneath the sand was a mystery, and mysteries were something Darren couldn't ignore. As he cleared more sand, the figure became clearer. It wasn't human. He could tell that now. The shape was too smooth, too sleek, too alien. His hands froze mid-motion as he realized what he was uncovering. It was a body. Not just any body. A woman's body, but not like any woman he had ever seen. Her skin, pale and translucent, shimmered in the sun, as if it were made of something otherworldly. She was unlike anything he had ever imagined. His mind struggled to comprehend it. But one thing was certain: she wasn't from this planet. Darren swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. He stepped back, uncertainty filling him. Should he leave her there? What if this was some kind of trap? What if she was dangerous? He thought about the stories the crew had shared, tales of alien life forms that could deceive, trick, or even kill. But something inside him couldn't walk away. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the desperation. He wasn't sure. All he knew was that he had to know more. With shaky hands, he reached forward and touched her cold skin. The moment his fingers made contact, a shock of energy pulsed through him. It wasn't painful, but it was sudden, unexpected, and it made his heart race even faster. He yanked his hand back, his mind reeling. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at her, unsure of what to do next. His instincts told him to run, to get away, to leave her in the sand where she belonged. But he couldn't. He couldn't leave this mystery unsolved. He had to know what she was, why she was here, and what it all meant. He knelt down beside her, his hands trembling as he continued to clear away the sand. His fingers brushed her hair, soft and alien, and then he gently touched her face. She was beautiful in a way that was both unsettling and mesmerizing. The glowing patterns etched into her skin were faint, pulsing with a soft light that seemed to respond to his touch. Then, her eyes snapped open. Darren recoiled in shock, stumbling backward. His heart stopped. Her eyes, those eyes, were not like human eyes. They were large, dark, and glossy, reflecting the endless desert sky. They fixed on him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. And then, just as quickly, her lips parted and a voice, cold and sharp, cut through the silence. "Fool," she said, her voice a strange, melodic tone that made Darren's skin prickle. "Now they'll find me." Darren's pulse hammered in his chest. He stared at her in stunned silence. Who was she? What did she mean by they? He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't form a coherent thought, let alone a question. The alien woman's gaze never wavered. It was as though she was seeing right through him, reading his every thought. She slowly sat up, her movements graceful, almost unnatural. For a moment she looked at him as though he was nothing more than a minor annoyance, a fleeting moment of insignificant contact in her existence. Darren's mind raced. He should run. He should leave. This was beyond him. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was curiosity. But he couldn't bring himself to turn away. "Who are you?" he finally managed to ask, his voice barely more than a whisper. His throat felt dried out. The woman's lips curled into a faint, almost amused smile. "It doesn't matter," she said, cryptically. "What matters is that you found me. And now they'll come." Darren's eyes widened. He didn't know what to say. He had so many questions, but none of them seemed to matter. All that mattered now was the ominous warning she had given him. "Who will come?" he asked. She didn't answer at first. Instead, she rose to her feet, her body swaying slightly as if the sand beneath her wasn't solid at all. She glanced around, her gaze scanning the desert with a strange sense of awareness. It was as though she could sense something he couldn't. "They'll find me," she repeated, her voice filled with an eerie certainty. "And when they do, you won't survive." Darren's heart pounded in his chest. His pulse was racing. He had no idea what she meant, but he knew one thing. He had just stumbled into something far beyond his understanding. Something dangerous. He wanted to run. He wanted to get away from her, from whatever this was. But the storm was coming, and he was trapped here. With her, and with whatever else was out there, waiting to find them. The wind howled, a faint rumble echoing across the desert as it grew louder. Darren could feel it picking up, stirring the sand into a frenzy around him. The storm was coming fast, and the shelter he had barely finished digging now seemed laughably insufficient against the coming fury. He looked back at the alien woman. She was standing now, her body poised and unyielding as she faced the horizon. Her eyes, still fixed on the empty expanse of the desert, were filled with something he couldn't quite comprehend, something ancient and knowing. She was no longer just an alien figure to him. She was a riddle, a puzzle, wrapped in a mystery he couldn't ignore. "You still haven't told me who you are," Darren said, his voice hoarse. His eyes darted to the approaching sandstorm, now a massive wall of swirling dust. The alien woman remained silent for a long moment. Her gaze never wavered from the horizon, as though she was listening to the wind itself, waiting for something. Darren's heart beat faster as the realization hit him. This wasn't just a random encounter. There was something bigger at play. Here, something far beyond his understanding. "I told you," she said finally, her voice smooth and cold. "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that you found me. And they will come for me. For you." Darren frowned. The words she spoke didn't make sense. Who was she talking about? Who were they? And why would they come for him? The alien woman slowly turned to face him, her glowing skin reflecting the harsh light of the setting sun. There was something hypnotic about the way she moved, fluid, almost ethereal. He couldn't take his eyes off her. "You should not have touched me," she said, her tone laced with a strange, almost detached sadness. Now there is no turning back. Darren's stomach twisted with unease. He hadn't asked for any of this. All he wanted was to survive, to escape the harsh reality of the desert. But now, he found himself caught up in something far darker, something he wasn't prepared for. The storm was getting closer, the wind picking up in intensity. Sand whipped through the air, stinging Darren's face as he pulled his sleeve up to shield himself. He could feel the pressure building in the air, the sensation of something imminent, something dangerous. "We have to get to shelter," he said, his voice urgent. The woman looked at him for the first time with a piercing gaze, and for a brief moment, Darren felt like she was seeing right through him. Her eyes narrowed, and then she nodded slowly, as though she had already anticipated his words. In time, Darren turned to hurry back to his makeshift shelter, but when he glanced over his shoulder, he saw the alien woman standing perfectly still, her feet barely touching the ground, as if she were unaffected by the storm's force. "Are you not going to take cover?" Darren asked, a hint of panic creeping into his voice. Her lips curled into a small, almost pitying smile. "You misunderstand. The storm is nothing compared to what's coming." Before Darren could respond, she began to walk toward the open desert, her footsteps leaving no trace in the sand. It was as if the storm didn't touch her. The desert winds parted around her like she was moving through water, a strange calm radiating from her, despite the chaos of the approaching sandstorm. "Where are you going?" Darren called after her, his voice strained. He took a step toward her but hesitated. Something deep inside him warned him not to follow her. She wasn't like anything he had encountered before. "I cannot stay in the shelter with you," she answered without turning around. "You will never understand why. But the storm is my warning, a harbinger of what's to come." Darren felt a chill run down his spine, despite the oppressive heat of the desert. What did she mean by harbinger? What was she expecting to happen? But as he watched her disappear into the swirling sand, something told him that the answers would come soon. He didn't know whether he should be terrified or fascinated, but the truth was, he didn't have much choice. He had to follow her. His survival instinct kicked in. The storm was upon him, and if he didn't find shelter, he wouldn't last the night. But the alien woman, the strange, cryptic figure who had appeared from the sand, seemed to be more than a mere survivor. She was part of something bigger, something that had come to find him. With a final glance at the approaching storm, Darren stepped out into the sand. He followed the alien woman at a distance, his heart racing in his chest. The wind howled louder, whipping sand into his face, making it difficult to see, but he didn't dare lose sight of her as he walked. He tried to make sense of everything. Who was she? What did she mean by they? What was happening to him? The questions tumbled around in his mind, but none of them had answers. Not yet. And then, in the midst of the storm, something strange happened. The ground beneath his feet trembled. It wasn't the wind, but something deeper, something more dangerous. The earth itself seemed to shift, like the desert was alive, awakening from a long slumber. The woman stopped walking, her head turning slightly as she listened to the vibrations in the ground. Darren stopped too, his pulse quickening. What was happening? "There," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the storm's fury. "They found us." Darren's stomach dropped. He spun around, his eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, the shifting sands revealed a dark silhouette. Something huge was coming toward them, moving with unnatural speed and purpose. It was too far to make out clearly, but whatever it wasn't human. The alien woman turned to face Darren, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of dread and acceptance. "There's no more running," she said quietly. "You can't escape it. The moment you found me, you became a part of this." Darren felt the weight of her words settle over him, like an inescapable truth. He had unknowingly stepped into a nightmare, and now there was no way out. The only question was, how would he survive it? The ground beneath Darren's feet shook more violently now. The wind howled like a beast, but it wasn't the storm that had him on edge anymore. It was the massive shadow creeping toward them from across the desert. It moved fast, too fast for the desert's unforgiving terrain. Whatever it was, it wasn't human. His eyes darted back to the alien woman. She hadn't moved since she spoke, her stance unyielding and calm. There was something unnerving about her quiet composure. How could she remain so still when something that could tear apart the desert was barreling toward them? "Do you see it?" Darren asked, his voice tight, his throat dry from the swirling sand. The alien woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head, as if listening for something in the air. Her eyes flicked toward the horizon, where the silhouette was growing larger by the second. "They're coming," she said, her voice colder than ever. "And you've already drawn there." Attention. Darren's stomach churned. He wanted to ask her who they were, but his words stuck in his throat. His mind was too focused on the approaching shadow. Whatever it wasn't something he could deal with alone. The sheer size of it was too overwhelming. He had no weapons, no defenses. Just himself and this strange, enigmatic woman. He glanced over his shoulder, toward the shelter he had painstakingly built. It felt like a joke now, a flimsy pile of sand meant to protect him from something much larger than he had anticipated. "Is there anywhere we can hide?" Darren asked, his voice shaking despite himself. "We can't outrun whatever that is." The woman didn't respond immediately. She stepped forward, and for the first time, Darren noticed how effortlessly she moved, like the air itself parted for her. As she walked, the sandstorm seemed to quiet, as if respecting her presence. She raised a hand, a faint blue glow pulsing from her fingertips as she scanned the horizon. The glow illuminated her face for a brief moment, revealing the tension in her eyes. For the first time since Darren had met her, she didn't look calm. She looked afraid. "This isn't a storm," she murmured, almost to herself. "It's a cover, a distraction." Darren's mind raced. A cover? A distraction? He looked around, trying to make sense of her words. And then it clicked. The wind wasn't just carrying sand, it was carrying something else. Something unnatural. As the massive shape drew closer, the true form began to emerge from the haze of sand. It was monstrous, like a colossal creature that belonged in a nightmare, not a real world. A massive blackened figure, its shape twisted and distorted, looming over the desert like some kind of ancient predator. The air grew heavier as it drew nearer, as if the creature was sucking the very life force from the desert. "Stay close," the alien woman ordered. "And do exactly as I say." Darren nodded, though he wasn't sure how much good that would do him. He wanted to bolt, to run, to escape the growing sense of dread that crept up his spine. But there was nowhere to run. The creature was too fast, and the desert was too vast. The woman turned toward him and extended her hand. She moved with speed and grace, closing the distance between them in seconds. Without thinking, Darren grabbed her hand, feeling the cold pulse of energy that seemed to radiate from her skin. "We need to get to the caves," she said urgently, pulling him toward the rocky outcroppings in the distance. Now, the caves. Darren had seen them from a distance when he had first crashed, jagged rocks that pierced the sky like ancient sentinels. They were his best chance at survival. But they were miles away, and the creature was closing in too fast. With her hand firmly in his, Darren's heart raced. His instincts screamed at him to break free, to run as far away from the alien woman as possible. But something in her eyes told him that without her, he wouldn't survive. She knew this desert, this planet, and she was his only hope. They ran. Together, the storm whipping around them, the wind growing louder. Darren's legs burned with every step, the sand resisting him as if it was trying to drag him back. But he couldn't stop. Not now. He glanced over at the woman. She moved effortlessly, like she wasn't even touching the ground. Her glowing skin pulsed with an ethereal light, a stark contrast to the darkness of the sandstorm around them. There was something almost otherworldly about her, something that made Darren feel both protected and terrified at the same time. The distance between them and the approaching creature grew shorter with every step. Darren's breath came in ragged gasps. The caves weren't close enough. They wouldn't make the alien woman's grip tightened on his hand. Her pace never slowed. "They're coming," she repeated, as if to herself. "But I'll fight them." Darren's mind raced as he tried to keep up with her. Who was she? Why did she keep saying they? What was she preparing to fight? He needed answers, but there was no time for questions now. The creature was too close, and then, as if on cue, the ground shook again, more violently this time. Darren's legs nearly gave out as he stumbled, but the woman pulled him up, steadying him as if he were a mere child. "I need you to stay focused," she said, her voice sharp. "The only way we survive this is together. Do you understand?" Darren nodded, his eyes wide with fear. He had no idea what she was talking about, but he knew he didn't have a choice. He had to trust her. The caves loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, their jagged entrances like the mouths of ancient beasts waiting to swallow them whole. The creature's presence was now unmistakable, the air thick with its weight. Darren could feel it bearing down on them, its hunger palpable as they neared the entrance. The woman suddenly stopped. She turned to face him, her expression cold and resolute. "Stay here," she commanded, releasing his hand. Darren's heart skipped a beat. "What are you?" But before he could finish, she stepped forward, raising her hands to the sky. The wind howled in response, swirling around her, and for a brief moment, Darren thought he saw the ground beneath her feet crack and shift, as if the desert itself was bowing to her power. He took a step back, watching in awe as she stood against the coming storm. Something powerful radiated from her, something ancient. The creature was coming closer, but for the first time, Darren felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she could protect them. Maybe she could stop it. The woman's voice rang out, loud and commanding. "Come." "Then," she said, her voice a clarion call, "come and face me." Darren's breath was shallow, his heart pounding like a drumbeat in his chest. The woman stood before him, her back to him now, her arms raised in a commanding gesture, as if she were trying to pull something from the very air itself. The sandstorm was violent around them, the winds tearing through the desert with unrelenting force, but the alien woman remained calm. It was as though she had become one with the desert itself, impervious to the chaos around her. Darren couldn't help but feel like a spectator in a battle that was already beyond his understanding. He glanced back at the dark silhouette still, closing in on them with terrifying speed. The creature was getting closer, the ground beneath his feet quaking with each step it took. It was massive, a shadow that threatened to swallow them whole. There was something unnatural about it, the way it moved, the way the sand seemed to part in front of it. Darren could feel the weight of its presence, the sheer power radiating from it. Whatever it wasn't from this world, but the woman she was different. She didn't flinch, didn't even hesitate. With a deep breath, she lowered her arms slowly, the wind around her dying down as if it were retreating from her command. Darren's pulse quickened as he noticed the faint glow emanating from her skin. It wasn't just the sandstorm that was swirling around them now. There was an energy in the air, an undeniable pull. Something ancient, something deep. "Who are you?" Darren finally asked, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain calm. He had been fighting the urge to ask that question since he had first met her. But now, with the creature closing in, he had to know. Her lips curled into a faint, unreadable smile. She didn't answer immediately, her eyes still locked on the horizon. The ground beneath her feet trembled again, but this time it wasn't just from the creature's movement. It was as if the earth itself was reacting to her presence. "You don't understand," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "You never could. I am not like you." Darren's stomach twisted at her words. He didn't want to hear that. He wanted answers, not riddles. He wanted to know how to survive this, how to get off this godforsaken planet. But she didn't seem to care about his survival in the same way he did. She had a purpose. And somehow, that made everything feel more uncertain. The air around them shifted again, the energy in the atmosphere intensifying. Darren's heart raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something far beyond his control. The creature was closer now, so close that Darren could feel the ground shaking beneath his feet. The shape was unmistakable now. It was a massive, hulking beast, its body covered in a thick, dark exoskeleton, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The creature's massive claws scraped the sand as it moved, sending showers of dust into the air. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The wind howled, but the space around them was eerily silent. The creature stopped moving, its dark eyes fixated on the woman in front of him. Darren couldn't move. He stood frozen, watching as the alien woman took a step forward, her eyes never leaving the creature. Then, with a deafening roar, the creature lunged. It moved faster than Darren had thought possible, the speed and power of its attack a blur. He couldn't even react, the world around him swallowed by the sheer force of the creature's presence. But before he could even process what was happening, the woman raised her hand, and everything seemed to freeze. The creature's massive form hung in midair, suspended by an invisible force, its claws inches from her face. The woman stood still, her body glowing faintly, a sense of calm emanating from her, as if she were completely unaffected by the chaos unfolding around them. Darren watched, awestruck, as the woman's hand moved, slow and deliberate. With a simple gesture, she flicked her fingers, and the creature was sent flying backward, crashing into the sand with an earth-shattering thud. For a moment, there was silence. The storm raged on, but the creature was no longer a threat. It lay in the sand, twitching, its massive form slowly rising, as if trying to shake off an invisible force that had bound it. The woman stepped forward, her expression unreadable, her movements fluid and graceful, as though she had been doing this for centuries. Darren couldn't breathe. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what he had just witnessed. The creature was still alive, still struggling against whatever force had immobilized it. But the woman, she had done it. She had stopped it. The woman turned to Darren, her eyes now meeting his. "You see?" she said, her voice cold. "This is why they will find you. They can't stop it. I can." Darren didn't know what to say. He didn't understand. He wanted to ask so many questions, to demand answers, but the words were stuck in his throat. How could she do that? What was she? The woman stepped toward the creature, which was now struggling to stand. Her eyes flicked to the horizon as if listening to something Darren couldn't hear. "They've sent it," she said quietly, almost to herself. "They're sending more." Darren's heart skipped a beat. More? Before he could ask, the ground began to tremble again. This time, it wasn't just from the creature. It was from something deeper, something far more menacing. And then, from the dark horizon, more shapes began to emerge, shadows that moved with eerie precision. They were coming. The alien woman's face hardened, and for the first time since Darren had met her, he saw a flicker of something, fear, maybe? No, it was determination. She knew what was coming, and she wasn't backing down. "They're coming," she repeated, her voice laced with a strange mix of dread and resolve. "And this time, I won't be able to stop them all." The air was thick with tension as the ground trembled beneath Darren's feet. The dark silhouettes were growing closer now, their figures shifting in the distance like shadows cast by an unseen hand. There was something about the way they moved, something unervingly coordinated, as if they weren't just creatures, but sentient beings with a purpose, a plan. And that plan, it seemed, involved finding him. Darren's heart pounded in his chest. As the alien woman stood frozen before him, her eyes locked on the approaching figures. She was no longer the calm, collected force of nature he had seen earlier. Her expression was hard, her face drawn in a grimace of determination. She looked like she was preparing for something that neither of them could escape. "They're coming," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, as though the words alone were enough to summon the nightmare. Darren couldn't tear his eyes away from the shapes in the distance. The storm had died down, the sand swirling lazily around them in the dying light of the day, but there was no mistaking the sense of urgency that had taken hold. The shadows weren't just coming, they were on them. He glanced back at the woman, desperation flooding his thoughts. "What are they? Who are they?" he demanded. "And why are they after me?" The alien woman's gaze didn't waver from the horizon. Her lips parted, but for a moment no words came out. It was as though she was trying to find a way to explain. Something too complicated, something too vast for him to understand. Finally, her voice broke through the silence. "You are the reason they've come. You're connected to what they want." Darren's blood ran cold at her words. He opened his mouth to protest, to demand more information, but she held up her hand, silencing him. "I don't have the time to explain it all," she said firmly. "But you are a part of this. They've been searching for you for longer than you can imagine." Darren stepped back, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of her words sinking in, dragging him into a world he couldn't comprehend. What did she mean by connected? Who were they, and what was it that they wanted with him? The woman took a step forward, moving with a grace that seemed unnatural. Her eyes were now sharp, focused, like a predator sensing its prey. "They'll stop at nothing to find you, and when they do, there will be no escape." Darren's mind raced. He felt like he was caught in the eye of a storm with no way out. I don't understand," he muttered, his voice shaking. "I'm just a man. I don't even belong here. I crashed. I don't know what's going on. Please, tell me more." The woman turned to face him, her glowing skin shimmering faintly in the light. There was a sadness in her eyes now, a deep sorrow that made Darren's chest tighten. For the first time since he had met her, she looked vulnerable. "It's not about what you understand," she said softly. "It's about what you are, and what you were meant to become." Darren felt a shiver run down his spine. "What I was meant to become?" he repeated. The words didn't make sense, but there was an undeniable truth to them, one that gnawed at the edges of his understanding. Before he could ask anything else, a low rumble echoed through the desert. Darren turned sharply, his eyes widening as the shapes in the distance began to move again, now faster, now with purpose. The ground beneath them trembled violently, as though the very earth was reacting to their arrival. "They're here," the woman said, her voice low, full of grim finality. "And I won't be able to protect you for much longer." A sharp panic seized Darren's chest. "What do you mean? You've been keeping them at bay. Why can't you stop them now?" The woman closed her eyes for a moment, her expression a mixture of sorrow and resignation. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper, as if the words were too heavy to bear. "Because I'm not the one they truly want. They've only been biding their time. Now they'll come for you." A cold shiver washed over Darren. His hands trembled at his sides. "No, I can't." He wanted to run, to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The vast desert stretched before him, endless and unforgiving. There was no escape, not from the storm, not from whatever was chasing them. The woman turned to face the dark shapes, which were now close enough to make out. They weren't just shadows. They were figures tall, thin, humanoid, but with features that were far from human. Their skin was dark, almost as if it had been carved from the stone of the desert itself. Their eyes glowed faintly, like lanterns in the dark. They moved in perfect unison, like soldiers marching to a silent beat. Darren's stomach churned. His legs felt weak beneath him, but there was nowhere to run. He couldn't escape this. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't outrun the inevitable. One of the figures stepped forward, its movement smooth and fluid, like it was gliding rather than walking. It was taller than the rest, its features sharp and angular, like a perfect sculpture made of stone. The creature's eyes fixed on Darren, its gaze intense and unnerving. The woman stepped in front of him, her body tense, her hands raised in a defensive posture. Darren could feel the energy building around her again, like an invisible force gathering in the air, but the creature didn't speak. Instead, it raised its hand, and Darren felt a pressure build in the air, like the weight of the world was bearing down on him. He gasped, his knees buckling beneath him. "Do not fight it," the woman said sharply, her voice filled with urgency. "You can't win. Not yet." Darren looked up at her. Confusion and fear etched across his face. "What do?" "You mean, the time is coming," she said. "You are the key. You are the one they've been searching for. And the moment they have you, they will change everything." The words hung in the air, their weight crushing Darren's chest. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what any of this meant. But he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer just a survivor of a crash. He was caught in something much bigger than himself. And the worst part? He didn't know if he was ready for it. The air was thick with an ominous silence as the strange figures closed in. Darren's heart pounded in his chest, every beat an echo of the terror that gripped him. The woman stood in front of him, her back straight, her face unreadable as the creatures moved in perfect unison. They were getting closer now, their glowing eyes fixed on Darren as though he were their sole focus. A chill swept over Darren, a sensation of being hunted never far. From his mind, his entire body trembled, not from the cold but from a deep, primal fear. He had survived a crash on a desert planet, but this was something far more terrifying than anything he had ever faced before. The woman raised her hands, a faint bluish light pulsing from her skin. Her eyes glowed with the same eerie light, but there was a subtle tremor in her movements, something that made Darren pause. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It wasn't just about protecting him. She was fighting something inside herself, something that made her every move deliberate and heavy with an unspoken burden. The creature that had been leading the group stepped forward, its dark obsidian-like skin shimmering as it moved. It was tall, easily twice Darren's height, and its eyes burned with an unnatural intensity. The air seemed to shift around it, as though reality itself was bending to its will. Darren's breath caught in his throat as the creature spoke. Its voice wasn't human. It was deeper, almost like a guttural growl, but there was a sharpness to it, like a blade scraping against stone. "We found you," it said, its voice carrying an unearthly resonance. "At last." The words echoed in Darren's mind, sending a cold shiver down his spine. They found you at last. What did that mean? Who was they, and why had they been searching for him? And why did the alien woman, this mysterious being who had saved him more than once, seem to know exactly who they were? The woman stepped forward, her stance steady despite the growing pressure in the air. She faced the creature, her eyes narrowing as if she were assessing a threat she had seen many times before. "I've known this day would come," she said, her voice low but firm. "But you've waited too long. It's too late now." The creature didn't flinch. It continued to move toward her, its long clawed fingers reaching out like a viper striking for its prey. "You think you can stop us?" the creature hissed. "You think you can hold back what is inevitable?" The alien woman didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she raised her hands, and the air around her shimmered with an energy that crackled and hissed like an electric storm. The sand beneath their feet began to shift, swirling in violent currents as if the desert itself were responding to her power. Darren could feel the weight of her energy. He could feel the sheer force of it crackling in the air. The pressure was unbearable, like the very atmosphere was about to split open. His chest tightened, and for the first time, he understood. She wasn't just an alien, she was a force of nature, a power that came from beyond this world. But even she seemed uncertain, as if the weight of what was about to happen was too much to bear. "Stay behind me," she commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "You're not ready for this." Darren opened his mouth to protest, to say something, but no words came out. He was too paralyzed by the sight of the creature before them, the fear pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't escape. Instead, he nodded, his legs shaking beneath him as he stepped back, unable to tear his eyes away from the confrontation unfolding before him. The creature stopped just short of the woman, its glowing eyes narrowing. It raised a hand, and for a moment, Darren thought he saw something a ripple, a shimmer flicker in the air around them, like the creature was about to launch some kind of attack. But the woman was ready. With a flick of her wrist, the air around her exploded in a burst of light, a shock wave that sent the creature stumbling back. Darren felt the force of it push him off his feet, but he managed to catch himself, his eyes wide as he watched the creature stagger, its glowing eyes flashing with fury. The woman didn't hesitate. She raised her hands again, and the sand around them began to swirl violently, forming into sharp, jagged shapes that hovered in the air like weapons. She was calling on the desert itself, shaping it, molding it into an army of sorts. The sand became a living thing, moving as if it were a part of her. Darren gasped as the sand slashed toward the creature, striking it with a force that left deep gouges in its dark, rocky form. But the creature was relentless. It staggered back, then lunged forward, slashing its claws through the air with terrifying precision. The woman's sand shields barely managed to block the attack, sending sparks flying. "I told you," the woman hissed, her voice trembling with the weight of the battle. "This is your last chance to turn back. Leave now, or I will end this." But the creature didn't retreat. Instead, it let out a chilling roar, one that seemed to shake the very air around them. The other figures, its companions, moved in closer, their glowing eyes narrowing in on Darren. He could feel their focus shifting to him, the weight of their gaze pressing on him like a physical force. He stumbled back, his legs giving out beneath him, as the energy around him seemed to vibrate with an almost unbearable intensity. "You will be ours," the creature said, its voice cold and final. "You will serve." The woman stepped forward, a look of determination etched into her face. "I will never let you take him." And with that, the battle escalated. The air crackled, the sand stormed around them, and the creatures moved with a speed and intensity that Darren couldn't fathom. The woman fought with everything she had, but even she seemed to struggle against the overwhelming power of the creatures. Darren had no choice but to watch, helpless. He was caught between two forces he didn't understand. He was the key, the reason they had come, and no matter how hard he tried to escape, he couldn't outrun this fate. The truth of what was happening, the truth of what they wanted from him, hung in the air like an oppressive weight. He didn't know how much longer the woman could hold him off. He didn't know how much longer he could survive. But one thing was certain. The moment the creatures had set their sights on him, there was no escaping the path he was on. The battlefield was chaos. The air crackled with energy, the wind swirling, with blinding sand and the deafening sound of the creatures' roars. Darren could barely see through the dust storm, but he could feel the immense pressure building with every passing second. The sand was alive, moving with unnatural precision, striking and defending at the will of the alien woman. The creatures were relentless, their dark forms cutting through the tempest with horrifying speed. The power clash was like nothing Darren had ever witnessed. The alien woman was standing her ground, but even her formidable powers were starting to strain under the relentless onslaught. She summoned sandstorms, twisted the desert around them into weapons of destruction, but the creatures kept advancing. One by one, their claws slashed through the defenses she created, sending showers of sand and energy flying in every direction. The woman's energy flickered like a dying star, and Darren could see the strain on her face, the fatigue building in her eyes. Darren had no idea what was happening, no idea why this was all happening. But one thing was clear. He was at the center of it all. The creatures wanted him, and the alien woman was willing to fight to her last breath to protect him. Her energy was waning. He could feel it. The air around him grew heavier, suffocating, as the woman began to falter, her movements slowing, her sand shields flickering as if they were about to break apart. And the creatures, they knew it. They were closing in for the final strike. Darren couldn't just stand there, paralyzed by fear. He had to do something. He had to help her. But what could he do? He had no weapons, no powers. He was just a crash survivor who had stumbled into a nightmare. His eyes darted around, searching desperately for something, anything. And then, amidst the chaos, he saw it. A sharp rock, half buried in the sand, gleaming in the pale light. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was better than standing there and waiting to die down without thinking. Darren rushed forward, dodging blasts of sand and energy as he grabbed the rock. It felt heavy in his hand, the weight of it almost comforting as he gripped it tightly. He turned back toward the woman, who was barely managing to stay on her feet now. Her eyes were wide with exhaustion, but they still held a flicker of determination. She was not going to give up. "Stay back," she shouted, but Darren couldn't listen. He couldn't just watch her die. Not after everything she had done for him. Without warning, he charged, running toward the closest creature. It saw him coming, its glowing eyes narrowing as it raised its claws, ready to strike. Darren's heart hammered in his chest, and for the first time, he felt like he had truly stepped into the unknown, completely out of his depth. But he wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when he had a chance. He swung the rock, catching the creature across the side of its face. The force of the blow was enough to stagger it, but not enough to take it down. The creature hissed, its eyes flashing with fury as it whipped around to face him. Darren barely managed to dodge its claws, the creature's massive talons swiping past his arm. He felt the rush of air as it missed, his body barely avoiding the deadly strike. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't even prepared. But in that moment, all he had was his will to survive and his will to protect the woman who had given him that chance. The alien woman cried out, raising her hands as the sandstorm around them intensified. The sand surged forward, hitting the creature with a force that sent it reeling back, crashing into its comrades. Darren stepped back, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear, but he didn't stop. He couldn't let them win. He couldn't let the woman lose everything. He wasn't sure what would happen if the creatures took him, but whatever it was, it couldn't be good. The creatures began to regroup, hissing and growling as they eyed Darren and the woman with renewed intensity. The desert around them trembled, and Darren felt the weight of their presence, this time more powerful than ever. The woman turned to him, her eyes filled with something fierce, understanding, gratitude. She didn't have time to speak, but the message was clear. She needed him, but not just to survive. She needed him to make a choice. Darren knew what he had to do. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something. Bigger, something that could change the fate of this planet, and possibly the universe itself. With all the strength he could muster, Darren reached into his chest pocket and pulled out the small hidden device he had taken from the wreckage of the ship. It was a communication device, simple, almost crude, but it was his last hope. "Please work," Darren muttered under his breath, his fingers trembling as he pressed the button. There was a crackling sound, and then, to his surprise, a response came through. "This is Commander Holt. Are you receiving? We've detected your signal. Hold on, help is on the way." Darren's heart stopped, then leaped in his chest. "Commander Holt?" He shouted into the device. "I need help. There's something here. Something ... something huge. We need extraction now." The woman's eyes locked onto Darren, a flash of recognition in her gaze. She knew what he had done. And for the first time, she didn't stop him. She didn't tell him to hold back. She allowed him this chance. The storm around them seemed to calm, just for a moment, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. "Help is coming," Darren repeated, almost disbelieving. "We're not alone anymore." But the creatures weren't finished. With a final, collective roar, they charged, moving faster than ever. Darren turned to face the woman, his heart sinking. There was no more time, no more hope, just the final stand. And then, in that moment, something shifted. The air grew still. The creatures froze mid-motion, as if time itself had stopped. Darren's heart stopped, and he realized the help wasn't just coming for him. The woman her power had called it. She had drawn the signal, the presence of something far greater than any of them could have anticipated. The creatures faltered. The alien woman stepped forward, raising her hands as the ground beneath them began to vibrate with incredible force. "They've come," she whispered, her voice filled with both relief and resignation. "The end has arrived." And then, just as the first of the creatures charged once more, a massive wave of energy engulfed the desert. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and the creatures vanished into the storm, their forms disintegrating before Darren's eyes as the final echoes of the battle faded into the silence. Darren stood there, chest heaving, his mind reeling. Woman collapsed to her knees, her energy spent, but she was alive. They had won. For now. Darren looked around, still processing what had just happened. "What now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The woman looked up at him, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. "Now," she said, her voice soft but firm, "we survive. Together." And as the desert calmed, a new dawn began to rise, one filled with uncertainty, but also with the possibility of hope.